What is going on, everyone? It's your guy Cole Jackson back here on Road Graders. Today we are moving into the trenches. We are starting with the defensive side of the football before we get into the offensive line later this week with a very special guest. So hit that like button, hit subscribe so you don't miss any more videos drop. We're going to be covering this team wire to wire once again this year, diving into the film specifically in the trenches. Looking forward to it. Before we jump into it, let's say a big thank you to our sponsors, One Bone. The big boys get a lot of love from One Bone's clothing line. They sponsor O-Line Masterminds. They love the big fellas. It's big and tall wear. Look good, feel good, play good. One Bone knows how to do it best. Go over to One Bone, shop what they have. I recommend the Bullet Tee. I have them in many colors, great wear. Use promo code ColeJackson15, get 15% off your first purchase over at One Bone. Thank you to sponsoring. Let's dive right into this breakdown, and we are going to be starting with the big boys that probably are wearing One Bone themselves. It's the One Tech group, so we're going to be going through defensive tackles, but looking at noses specifically. So obviously, the Ravens are getting year four. Forget what year it is. We're getting a big year four. They grow up so fast, of Travis Jones. And so this is going to be a very, very interesting year. This is going to be a year where we don't have Michael Pierce in the fold. He has retired. Probably the biggest free agent loss, maybe arguable there. But I would say probably the biggest free agency loss or off-season loss, obviously losing Pierce to retirement. And really the big reason for that is the healthy rotation that Jones and Pierce had last year. I think, when they're both healthy, I think made a big difference, kept them fresh, kept a solid nose tackle out, a solid to above average to good nose tackle out at all times on the football field, which is a huge advantage. And so the Ravens went out, brought in John Jenkins to compete with UDFA Jason Jones. Jenkins isn't going to wow you, but he is a big guy that can clog holes and eat double teams, try and split them, that sort of thing. He'll be able to go out there and do his job. Jason Jones isn't a guy that's going to, wow you on the stat sheet. Again, he's not a pass rush upside guy. Oregon transfer to Auburn, where he played the last 3 years. He's 23 years old as a rookie, 6'6", 325, so he does fit that cut of a big body nose tackle. I think Jones is going to push Jenkins quite a bit in camp. I think Jones is a guy to keep an eye on. Just guys with that type of ups, that type of size or that type of skill level, I think are always really interesting. Coming out of a big program where he was never able to kind of take a big step. It'd be interesting to see what he does with those intangibles with some NFL coaching. But this is really going to come down to Travis Jones and how much he can take that next step. I think I had a tweet thread going last year. It was like the oh shit Travis Jones play of the week, where he would just do something completely silly, in a good way. And it's really stacking those plays and being more consistent. It's not that he can't do it. We've seen him do it. We've seen him, hit some of the best rip pulls, pull rips, swimming guys, ridiculous stuff to make big plays in the backfield. It's just doing it more consistently. And that's where we're going to notice that lack of Michael Pierce when he's getting in there, because Pierce was always so consistent. So I'm really looking forward to seeing what's going to happen with this nose tackle group, but I see a real position battle there between Jenkins and Jones for that backup one tech position. As you can see, it's a bit of a shallow spot. Getting into the three tech and talking about guys that need to be more consistent. Nnamdi Madubuike obviously had the All-Pro year in 2023. I would call it a disappointing year last year. I don't think it was, I wouldn't call him a bust in terms of a free agent signing by any means. Still top 20 in pretty much all pass rush metrics among his defensive tackle peers. So I don't want to give the impression that he was bad by any means, but when you're getting paid as a top guy at your position and you're not getting, those splashy plays when the pass rush is disappearing, you're always going to take a little bit of that heat. And so I think Madubuike wears a little bit of that, at least in my opinion. So Madubuike's got to get back to that consistent form, but I also think the Ravens defense stabilizing around him will make a big difference. And hopefully getting another step from Travis Jones is going to give him that kind of partner in crime. Then you get Brody Washington, who I thought last year was his best year as a pro. Just stood out a lot more in terms of his ability against the run. Tough guy to pay. I think a lot of fans are disappointed in giving him that contract a couple of years ago. But the Ravens were very shallow at defensive tackle, and they wanted to get some bodies back, so they weren't relying on UDFAs to play significant snaps. That's why they paid him, and I think he lived up to that net last year. So getting him in there, again, this is a position that you don't see a ton of depth, not a lot of names on here. that you're going to want to see out there on game day. So, especially with a position that you want to be rotating and that you want to keep guys healthy at. So I think Brody's going to have to come in and play a lot of snaps, especially I don't see Brent Urban coming back this year. Unfortunately, one of my favorite guys to watch. So Brody's going to have to step into that, run D defensive tackle role. And then kind of the partner in crime in terms of rotational is going to be Anise Peebles coming out of Virginia Tech. Very fun pass rusher, a guy that I really enjoyed watching when I got into his tape. And that's a guy that I think can be that rotational pass rusher, a guy that doesn't have to play against the run early. I think they got Brody to do that. But when Peebles is active, he can get after it in the pass rush game. He's going to be a guy that I got my eyes on in preseason because I want to see those flashes early and often from him. And then the Ravens bring back a bunch of former UDFAs and Okoye and Ravenel really stand out as the guys. CJ Ravenel, there was a lot of buzz around him last year in training camp, and he wasn't able to kind of take those steps. But, again, with the lack of depth, I think there's definitely going to be a couple of these guys making practice squads, seeing some elevations onto the game day roster, being that injury depth. So this is a group that, when it comes to preseason games, I want to keep my eye on these defensive tackles because these year two guys may come into the fold if injuries hit this line. And again, a position that I think it's probably the most shallow. Maybe we'll talk about that a little bit when we get to the linebacker position as well. But just not a lot of depth there. Then we get into the edge rusher position, and this is a very interesting one. Starting guys, I think, are locked in with Owe and Van Noy. Owe going into a contract year on his 5th-year option. We just saw George Karlaftis and Gregory Rizzo, probably his 2 biggest comparables, getting 22.5 million. Karlaftis get 25. But that's kind of his contract range, right? It's kind of that 4-year 80, 4-year 85, 5-year 100, $1 million contract. So always going into that territory. He had the tweet earlier in the offseason. I should have got it to throw it up on the screen, but he was basically expressing frustration. It seems like I know for a fact they were pretty far apart in terms of contract negotiations. The Ravens were trying to lock him in before his contract year, which they always try and do. And I believe that was around the $15 million a year mark, and always pushing for over 20. So they just were too far apart. So Owe will go into this year. This is a big one for him, coming off double-digit sacks. But just not the most consistent in terms of pass rush win rate. Specifically, if you look at last year, you look at our edge rush group, Owe and Van Noy, great sack production, but not a ton on a per snap basis in terms of pass rush win rate. Neither were in the top 32. So neither were kind of that starting caliber edge rusher from a pass rush win rate perspective. And I think that stood out, right? I mentioned it earlier, the pass rush for, periods of time would disappear. And I think if you look at Owe's sacks, I think he had 2-3 sack games. So, I mean, when you start looking at it that way, he's fading for moments, and that's where it gets tough. Then you get Kyle Van Noy, who's just having quite the renaissance in Baltimore. A guy that I think can still get it done. I think he's going to be a key piece, but a guy that I want to be able to manage his snaps for the same reason. Well, I wouldn't say the same reason. Van Noy's more age related. Jones is more, you just want one tech that's going to be fresh. But the more that we can manage Kyle Van Noy's snaps, I think the better. And what better guy to have in here to be able to do that than Mike Green? And, this was a guy that before getting into all the personal issues around Mike Green, just watching his tape, I thought he was the most pro-ready pass rusher in this draft class, and that includes Abdul Carter. I still think that from a pure player perspective, obviously those personal issues, can't ignore them. They happened. The Ravens are taking a chance on him. They've claimed they did their due diligence. We'll see how this one plays out. Hopefully, everything goes well for, to show Mike Green's, he's got it together and, can function. I think that's really important. But the Ravens took a huge risk here, and that's a risk that they don't normally take. So it's going to be really interesting to see how this plays out. But Mike Green's a legit guy. I think can very much be in play for Defensive Rookie of the Year. He's got that type of impact at a marquee position, and a guy that, if you look at skill set and what he's bringing as a player, obviously he's a first-round pick. I think he was a top 15 pick, and the Ravens get him late in the second round. Just wild to see. And then you got Tavius Robinson, my fellow Canadian, that is going to come in here and be that Jarrett Johnson type role, right? He's just going to come in. He's going to do all the little things that you want to see done. He's going to play like a Raven every snap he's out there. Gritty edge setter on the edge. I love it. Like Courtney Upshaw type guy that just as part of this rotation. I'd like to see him play some more snaps on the inside. We talked about Brent Urban a little bit earlier. If they're not bringing him back, Tavius Robinson's more of that physical, bigger body guy that I think could be that kind of 5 tech as part of the pass rusher rotation when they want to get multiple outside linebackers. You get Owe, you get Mike Green wide, you get Tavius Robinson inside with Matabike. I think that creates a lot of opportunities for you to change around personnel. And then for the fifth spot, you got Ojabo and Adisa Isaac that are going to be kind of competing. And I'll throw Malik Cam in there because he really stood out a couple preseasons ago. He's just been hurt, hasn't been able to get healthy. But those three, Isaac didn't impress anyone last year. Ojabo has been injured or working back from injury for basically his entire career. And same with Malik Cam. So these are three guys that I'd say this is similar to the corner room where I want to see one of these guys pop. I don't know which one it's going to be, but I'm glad they don't have to pop into a starter spot. Coming in and competing for the fifth spot, I think is a really good position to be, because if you do, unearth some of that Ojabo upside, then you're adding him into that rotation. And that's just good news for the Ravens. Same with Isaac, maybe Isaac in year 2. I don't want to be too low on him. They took him in the 3rd round for a reason, but he just didn't put anything on tape last year to get me excited. And then Malik Cam has that explosive, pass rush upside. And then they're bringing in Kamon Rucker and Black out of Missouri. Black was hurt a lot. And I think could be a guy that's, could be a difference maker. These are guys, Rucker and Black, that are going to play a ton in the preseason. I can see them dominating and really, getting fans pretty excited, like we've seen in the past with a guy like Malik Cam. So it'll be interesting. Black's the guy to keep an eye on. He was hurt a lot in college, and I think the type of explosive upside that he has, I think, is something that we'll see pop in the preseason. So that's really where I think fans should focus their attention. And then we get into the linebacker position to round out this front 7. Obviously, we got Roquan coming in as the starting Mike. And what he's looking for and what the Ravens need to find is who's his partner in crime going to be at that will spot. So I have Teddy Buchanan backing up the Mike here, but I think Buchanan and Trent Simpson are really going to be competing at that will spot. You got the vet special team ace and Jake Hummel. But it's going to be between Simpson and Buchanan. I really see this being deployed as a committee. I think Simpson is going to, try and be that early down, bumper type guy, chase and run guy that he can be. And I think Buchanan's going to excel a little bit against the pass. And the Ravens kind of did that last year when they moved on from Trent Simpson. They were putting CJ Board out there, as a pass guy. They were putting Malik Harrison out there against the run. And it was basically being deployed as a committee. And I think that's what the Ravens are going to look to do here. They're going to try and get Buchanan involved early as a pass coverage guy, and they're going to get Simpson in there playing downhill and trying to get that processing up. That was really the issue with Trent Simpson. Slow processing, just wasn't getting it done, and led to some issues. But then the Ravens brought in some very interesting UDFAs. They bring in Jay Higgins out of Iowa, a guy that I thought was going to be drafted. Was shocked that he wasn't, didn't test well. That was probably why, but I think he plays a lot more athletic than he showed, especially against the pass. So I think Jay Higgins, real dark horse to make this team and push guys like Buchanan for, a role early. And then you got Chandler Martin, who was making plays all over camp already. So really excited to see how this plays out. But the Ravens made it very clear they wanted a guy to come in as a pass coverage specialist. That's what they targeted here in the UDFA class, as well as who they drafted. And that really shows me what they see in Trent Simpson. They see a run linebacker. And, hopefully Trent Simpson can unearth some of that pass coverage that we saw at Clemson when he was playing that overhang role, especially 2 years ago, the year before he got drafted, where I thought he played a lot better than his draft year as a more traditional will. So, it could be a Patrick Queen situation where it took a couple years for the processing to catch up. He's got all the athleticism. He's physical as hell. I really want to see Trent Simpson take that next step, but I'm glad to see they brought in pass coverage guys to really push him. And if it becomes a little bit more of that deployment by committee, I'll be happy to watch it. But what we missed last year was Roquan Smith and Patrick Queen being deployed as heat-seeking missiles, especially in the pass rush game, the way they were able to work on stunts. I think that was a huge thing that we were missing, and that type of thing is what Trent Simpson brings to the table, especially with some of his edge rush ability. He's got that pass rush ability, blitzing him inside, using him on stunts. There's a ton to unearth there. I just hope he can make that step. I think it's going to go a long way, and then I'm excited to see what Buchanan, Higgins, Martin, Kwenku, guys like that can do in the pass rush game. And then they got, Jake Hummel as a special teammate. So really exciting linebacker group. We're missing that kind of locked in starter beside Roquan, but a lot of interesting names and a lot of storylines to follow. So that's a breakdown I see. It's going to be very interesting. A lot of opportunities here for UDFAs to push for a roster spot in that front seven. It's going to be a key spot to watch in preseason, seeing guys in those one-on-one opportunities. So excited to see it. So hit that like button if you enjoyed this breakdown. Hit subscribe so you don't miss the next drop. And as always, be good to yourselves, be good to each other. Peace out, everyone.